After many days of traveling, Moses arrived in the land of Midian. Exhausted, thirsty, and completely alone, he sat beside a well to rest. The man who had once lived in a palace now owned nothing but the clothes on his back. To human eyes, it looked like the end of his story. But in God's hands, it was only the beginning. The wilderness would become Moses' classroom. The shepherd would become a leader. The fugitive would become God's chosen servant. And before long, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would call his name from a burning bush. The greatest chapter of Moses' life was still ahead. Moses sat quietly beside the well. The long journey from Egypt had left him exhausted. He had no palace, no servants, no title, only the hope that somehow God was still with him. As he rested, a group of young women arrived. They came to draw water for their father's flock. Their laughter filled the quiet desert air. For the first time in many days, Moses saw a moment of peace. Before the women could water their sheep, a group of rough shepherds arrived. They pushed the women aside. They tried to claim the well for themselves. The women were helpless. His strength was guided by wisdom. He stepped forward. He confronted the shepherds. The women were safe. He stayed. It was simple work. He first learned how to serve others. When the women returned home much earlier than usual, their father was surprised. "Why have you returned so quickly today?" he asked. They told him about the Egyptian who had defended them, the man who had protected them, the man who had watered their flock. Their father, Jethro, smiled. "Why did you leave him there?" God had already turned into a divine appointment. Moses accepted Jethro's invitation, rest, and friendship. Jethro welcomed him with open arms. The lonely fugitive was no longer alone. God answers our prayers through the kindness of people he places along our path. Moses became part of Jethro's household. He fell in love with Jethro's daughter Zipporah. They were married. Soon, God blessed them with a son. The name meant, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." He never forgot where he came from, and he never forgot his people. Days became months, months became years, years became decades. 40 years passed. Moses became a shepherd. Every morning he led sheep across mountains and valleys. He learned patience. He learned endurance. He learned to recognize every path through the wilderness. What once seemed like wasted years were actually years of preparation. The palace had taught Moses how to rule. The wilderness taught him how to trust God. Far away in Egypt, the suffering of God's people continued. Their cries rose to heaven. God heard every prayer. He saw every tear. He remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The time for deliverance had finally come. And on an ordinary day, while Moses was leading sheep near Mount Horeb, his ordinary life was about to change forever. Ahead of him, a bush would burn without being consumed. And from that fire, God himself would call Moses by name. The shepherd's quiet years were ending. The deliverer's mission was about to begin. For 40 years, Moses had lived the quiet life of a shepherd. Day after day, he guided his flock through the hills and valleys of Midian. He knew every rocky path, every watering place, every shelter from the desert wind. Life had become peaceful. The palace of Egypt felt like a distant memory. But on this ordinary day, God was about to interrupt the ordinary. Sometimes, the greatest moments of our lives begin on the most ordinary days. As Moses led the sheep near Mount Horeb, something caught his attention. A bush was on fire. Its branches blazed with brilliant flames. Yet the bush was not burning up. The fire did not consume it. Moses stopped. He stared in amazement. "I will go over," he said, "and see this strange sight." Little did he know, he was about to step into one of the holiest moments in history. As Moses drew closer, a voice came from the flames. "Moses, Moses." The sound was powerful, yet filled with love. Moses answered, "Here I am." The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob was speaking directly to him. After 40 years of silence, heaven had spoken. Then God said, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals. For the place where you are standing is holy ground." Immediately, Moses removed his sandals. He bowed before the burning bush. This was no ordinary mountain, no ordinary fire. This was the presence of the living God. Holiness filled the wilderness, and Moses stood in awe before his Creator. God continued to speak. I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries. I know their pain. As Moses listened, he covered his face. He was afraid to look upon God. The cries of Israel had reached heaven. Every tear, every prayer, every moment of suffering. God had seen them all. The people may have wondered if God had forgotten them, but he never had. He had been working all along. Then came the words that changed everything. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh. You will bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Moses could hardly believe what he was hearing. Him, a shepherd, an old man who had spent 40 years hiding in the wilderness. God was calling him to stand before the most powerful king on earth. The mission seemed impossible, but when God calls someone, he also gives them the strength they need. Fear filled Moses' heart. He asked, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Who am I to bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" It was an honest question. 40 years earlier, Moses had believed he could rescue his people by his own strength. He had failed. Now he saw only his weaknesses. But God was not looking at Moses' ability. God was looking at his own power. The Lord answered, "I will be with you." Those 5 words changed everything. God's presence would be enough. Moses asked another question. If the Israelites ask who sent me, what shall I tell them? Then God revealed his holy name. I am who I am. Tell them. I am has sent me to you, the eternal God, the one who has no beginning and no end, the one who keeps every promise, was sending Moses back to Egypt. Moses stood quietly before the burning bush. The fear was still there. The questions were still there. But something had changed. The shepherd had received his calling. The journey back to Egypt had begun. And the God who called him would never leave his side. Even after hearing God's voice, Moses still struggled with doubt. What if they do not believe me? What if they refuse to listen? God did not become angry. Instead, he patiently strengthened his servant's faith. What is that in your hand? God asked. A staff, Moses replied. It was an ordinary shepherd's staff, a tool Moses had carried every day for 40 years. God said, "Throw it on the ground." The moment it touched the earth, it became a serpent. Moses stepped back in fear. Then God said, "Take it by the tail." As Moses obeyed, the serpent became a staff again. The ordinary had become extraordinary. When God is in control, even the simplest things become instruments of his power. Then the Lord gave Moses another sign. Put your hand inside your cloak. Moses obeyed. When he pulled it out, his hand was covered with a terrible skin disease. He stared at it in shock. Then God said, "Put your hand back into your cloak." Again Moses obeyed. When he removed it, his hand was completely healed. The God who allows healing is also the God who restores completely. Nothing is impossible for him. God gave Moses one final sign. If they still do not believe, take water from the Nile, pour it onto dry ground, and it will become blood. These signs were not magic. They were reminders that the Creator rules over all creation. The God who made the rivers could change them. The God who formed mankind could heal them. Nothing was beyond his authority. Yet Moses still hesitated. "O Lord, I have never been a good speaker. I am slow of speech." He feared standing before Pharaoh. He feared speaking before crowds. He feared failure. But God answered with gentle authority. Who made the human mouth? Who gives people the ability to speak? Now go. I will help you speak. God was not asking Moses to depend on himself. He was asking him to depend on the one who created him. Still uncertain, Moses pleaded once more, "Please send someone else." For a moment, the Lord became angry. Yet even then, his mercy remained. God said, "Your brother Aaron is already on his way to meet you. He will speak to the people. You will tell him what to say." God was building a team. Moses would receive God's words. Aaron would speak them. Together, they would stand before Pharaoh. Sometimes God answers our weakness by sending faithful people to walk beside us. Moses returned home. He spoke with his father-in-law, Jethro. "Please let me return to Egypt. I want to see whether my people are still alive." Jethro looked at Moses with kindness. He simply said, "Go in peace." Moses gathered Zipporah and their sons. Their belongings were packed. The season of quiet shepherding had come to an end. A greater journey was about to begin. Across the desert they traveled. Moses walked with the staff of God in his hand. No longer was it just a shepherd's staff. It had become a symbol of God's authority. Each step brought Moses closer to Egypt, closer to Pharaoh, closer to the mission God had prepared for him decades earlier. The road ahead was uncertain, but God's promise remained certain. "I will be with you." And that promise was enough. Just as God had promised, Aaron came to meet Moses near the mountain of God. The two brothers embraced with great joy. After many years apart, they stood together again. Moses told Aaron everything the Lord had said. He showed him the miraculous signs. Together they traveled to the elders of Israel. Aaron spoke God's message. Moses performed the signs. The people believed. For the first time in many years, hope returned to Israel. The God of their fathers had remembered them. The time of deliverance had finally come. But before freedom could begin, they would have to stand before the most powerful ruler in the world. The greatest confrontation in Egypt's history was about to unfold.